good? Welcome, everybody. So happy to see you. This is a good day. This is a day of celebration. We're so happy to have people from all 5 boroughs, parents and educators who believe in fairness for our schools. And I want to start by thanking the members of the City Council. The Speaker will introduce each of them. But we're here because Speaker Johnson and the City Council made a very major priority in their response to the preliminary budget. They focused on our schools, they focused on our children, and they focused on the need to continue our efforts towards greater equity. And in the Council's budget response, fair student funding was a major priority. I've said for years now, I believe in a productive partnership between the Mayor's office and the Council. We've gotten a lot done, and we're going to continue to get great things done under this Speaker and this Council. So this priority meant a lot to the Council, and it meant a lot to me, and it was time to act on it. The fact is, we have a fundamental vision for our schools called equity and excellence. Remember, you can't have one without the other. Excellence is what we strive for, but if excellence is only in some schools and not in others, we haven't done the job. Equity means a standard held in common, a high standard held in common, and believing that every child deserves the right to fulfill their potential. That's what we are working on today. We do not want to see some schools in some neighborhoods have what they need and other schools in other neighborhoods not have enough. We are fighting against a problem that bluntly has been here for decades, even generations. But in this generation, we're going to fix the problem. Amen. And again, I want to thank all these leaders, these activists, parent activists, and people who have been involved in every community who have fought for this for a long time. And I'm going to mention the campaign for fiscal equity because this is a crucial part of the equation. I want everyone to remember that for decades, the schools in this city were not fairly funded by the state, and an extraordinary effort that started at the grassroots demanded fairness, not just for New York City, by the way, but for upstate cities that had suffered, for rural areas that had suffered in the state. They took a lawsuit to the highest court in New York State, and they won. Now that sounds good, doesn't it? Yeah. That was about a decade ago. There's just one problem with this story. We still haven't seen the money. And all those other parts of the state that deserve more are still waiting. We believe that responsibility still has to be fulfilled by the state of New York, and we are not going to let the campaign for fiscal equity end until we have fiscal equity. Right. But even when the state doesn't act, we don't stand still, because we're going to do everything we can do. The entire concept of the equity and excellence vision is to break down that bad history, to create a strategic reality where we invest in many ways in the schools that were left behind. And whether you're talking about pre-K or 3K, or you're talking about AP for all, or you're talking about literacy for third-grade students, these resources are reaching the schools that used to not get enough. They're disproportionately reaching those schools, in fact. And they're helping to create a new era of opportunity for our kids. But that's not enough. I want to be very clear. We believe in this vision profoundly. We believe it's making real, profound impact on our children. But we've got to go farther. And that's where we come to the question of fair student funding. We got to do that as well. We've got to address that as well. And we're never going to stop fighting for that state funding. But we have to do whatever we can do whenever we can do it to address the issue. I have said many times, I'm going to keep saying it, our goal is to make this the fairest big city in America. We can't be the fairest big city if a child's destiny is determined by their zip code. We have to do better. We have to do better. And that's why the council's focus was so important to me, because it signaled that they believed of all the important things we could do, this was one of the things that had to be one of the highest priorities for all of us. Now, I want to be clear. Together with the council, over these last 4 years, we've been acting on this issue. And we've said when the state gives us any decent amount of funding, we've focused on fair student funding. So here are the facts. From the beginning of this administration, we've put $230 million into fair student funding, and that's recurring. Once we put it in, it stays in the budget year after year. We also focused on other ways that we could apply this concept. For example, all 94 of the original renewal schools were brought up to the 100% level in fair student funding. We know that we have to do anything that we can at our disposal. And again, I just want to give you a sense of this is taking steps. We wouldn't have to take all these steps if that CFE mandate were fulfilled. Just to give you a frame of reference, what would it have meant this year if the CFE court case were actually followed by the state of New York? We would have gotten $1.2 billion more. That's with a B. $1.2 billion more in funding if the highest court in the state had been honored with follow-through by the state government. But since we didn't, we're going to do everything we can on our own. And so we're announcing today, jointly with the council, that we are investing another $125 million in fair student funding. They approve, Corey. They approve. The people have spoken. Now, my friends, the sheer magnitude of this investment, it will reach over 850 schools in this city. Every part of the city will benefit. What does it mean for our continued effort to end the days of disparity in funding? Well, when we came into office, beginning of 2014, the floor for fair student funding, meaning the lowest a school had in funding, was 81% of the goal. There were schools in the city that had 81% of the goal. And the average at that point also was 81%, meaning if you average all the schools in the city, they were at 81% of the goal. With the actions we've taken today, from the moment we came in till now, working with the council, that floor is going from 81% to 90%. That means no school in this city will be below 90% of the goal. And the average, and this is striking, is going from 81% just 4 years ago to 93% citywide. So I want to say, with gratitude to the Speaker and the City Council, together we are putting our money where our mouth is, and we're focusing in so many ways on making up for the mistakes of the past and putting this school system into a place of real fairness and decency for all our kids. What does it mean? It means in different schools, each school will make its own choices, but it could mean more teachers. It could mean more reading specialists, literacy specialists. It could mean more guidance counselors, more tutoring, more school supplies. There's so many different ways, more technology, that schools can use this, but whatever way you slice it, it's going to help them be stronger. So I'll conclude before turning to the Speaker with one point in English and then a quick summary in Spanish. The point in English is this. I remember as a parent, starting out as a parent, talking to other parents And there was this parlance that was common, this phrase that was common, and it really pained me. People would say out loud, oh, that's a good school, quote unquote, good school, and that's a bad school. Think about the moral problem of anyone believing a school is a bad school. What does it say if that's what people believe was the commonplace reality? We got to end the era of New Yorkers believing any school in our public schools is a bad school. We got to make that a thing of the past. Briefly in Spanish, no podemos ser la ciudad más justa del país si no tenemos equidad en nuestras escuelas. Por eso estamos invirtiendo $125 millones en 850 escuelas para asegurar que tienen los recursos que necesitan. Seguimos dedicados a ayudar a cada niño en cada vecindario, en cada condado de nuestra ciudad. With that, and with great appreciation, I turn to the Speaker of the City Council, and I thank him for his leadership in the fight for fairness for our kids. Speaker Corey Johnson.
Great news today. Good morning. Before I give some brief comments, I want to acknowledge all the members of the City Council who are here, who made this a big priority. We're joined by Council members Ben Kalos, Bob Holden, Matthew Eugene, Adonis Rodriguez, Robert Cornegie, Helen Rosenthal, Debbie Rose, Antonio Reynoso, Jimmy Van Bramer, Margaret Chin, Carlina Rivera, Donovan Richards, Barry Grudenchik, Fernando Cabrera, Jumani Williams, Adrian Adams, Karen Kozlowitz, Costa Constantinides, Diane Ayala, Alika Ampry-Samuel, Keith Powers, Peter Koo, Majority Leader Lori Cumbo, Vanessa Gibson, and I'll speak a little bit more about them in a moment, Council members Mark Traeger and Danny Drum. Did I forget anyone? Oh, great. So I am, thank you. I am overjoyed to be here this morning for this important announcement. It is so satisfying when we get to enact policy that will help thousands and thousands of children. It is a true joy, a really perk of the job, when each branch of government fulfills its promise to the people, works together, and gets something done that is important and exceptional. I want to give credit where credit is due. I want to thank you, Mayor de Blasio, and your team for moving this ball forward. Thank you very much. I know how strongly the mayor feels about offering quality public education to kids in this city. Universal pre-K is one shining example of that. I think it's going to be one of the most important legacy items, not just for this mayor during his mayoralty, but for the city of New York, and he deserves credit for that. I know that today must be gratifying for him as well. I also want to give a huge, well-deserved thanks to all of my colleagues in the City Council, but I especially want to focus on two members. Council member and Chair of the Finance Committee, Danny Drum, and Council member and Chair of the Education Committee, the fighting Mark Traeger from South Brooklyn. Both are former educators, both in public and in private, constantly talk about the need for investing in our children. And I can tell you that in our budget negotiating meetings, in the hearings that you saw throughout the preliminary budget. You saw that these two council members continued to hammer this point and wanting to bring the numbers up, as the mayor said, on fair student funding. Councilmember Drum, before he was chair of the Finance Committee, as many of you know, chaired the Education Committee, and I believe he really laid the groundwork through his years of advocacy to help, of course, Councilmember Traeger, the chair of Education Committee, really help the advocacy on this from the council side. So they are both former educators, and they pushed incredibly hard to make this happen. This not have happened without them, so I want to give them a big round of applause. Now, we get to stand up here today, but there are always important people behind the scenes that are doing the yeoman's work on this. And I see just over there our incredible finance director at the City Council, LaTanya McKinney, who spent an enormous amount of time on this. And I want to thank her and her entire staff. The council has pushed for increased fair student funding for years, and as the mayor said, we made it a significant priority in our preliminary budget response to the administration this year. Well, hard work and persistence paid off. We pushed for it because the bottom line is we want to end inequities in school funding, period, end of story. We want more money to go to schools that have the greatest need, and we want it to be distributed in a fair way. And under this plan, this will happen. What will happen because of this funding is, as the mayor said, 854 schools, 854 schools with higher than average needs will receive additional funding. What will happen is schools in every community school district will receive more money to pay for art programming, school activities, sports activities, and more teachers. I see we're joined by the president of the Principals Union, Mark, who's a good friend, and he would attest to this, that principals know what their school communities need. And sending more money directly to their schools will allow them to make decisions based on those needs, and that's important. To some, how this came about is a function of our budget process. The back and forth between the executive and legislative branches of city government. It might seem bureaucratic, it might seem in the weeds, it might seem wonky, but to me, it's a great example of government working well together and working well to benefit the children of the city. So I am really, really proud of this announcement today. I had the opportunity to meet with our new chancellor about 2 weeks ago in my office, and we didn't meet for too long. We both had a busy day, but the one issue that I was able to talk with him in depth about was fair student funding. And he was totally briefed on it, understood the issue inside and out, and talked about, didn't make any commitments, of course, but talked about wanting, of course, to see principals have greater autonomy and being able to make these decisions. And we had a very good conversation about that. I think the mayor made, and we ended up with the right person for chancellor of the city of New York, and I am grateful for that. So we put in our budget response an ask of $250 million. Today's announcement is $125 million. But the point of us putting that number in was to build on the success of the past that the mayor talked about, bringing the number up and eventually getting to 100% of fair student funding for every single school. And that is what we will continue to push on in the years to come. Today is a continued down payment on the success of our school system, and I am very, very grateful that we were able to work collaboratively with the mayor on this, to do this, even before we go into executive budget hearings, to have this important win. So I am really grateful for today, and I look forward to continuing to invest in our school system and to ensure that local schools and principals have the ability to decide where money is needed. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
So I want to recount to everyone that when I was in the interview process with Richard Carranza, he proactively said the phrase equity and the phrase social justice an extraordinary number of times, and made clear that this was his personal life's mission and his personal interpretation of the meaning of public education. And so this is a day that certainly boosts his efforts to create a fairer city and a fairer school system for all our children. Chancellor Richard Carranza.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to just say that today is an absolutely phenomenal day for the children of New York City. Yes. Absolutely phenomenal day. So thank you for that introduction, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Speaker, thank you. I've appreciated our conversations and the passion. Members of the City Council, thank you for your support. To our parents, our supporters, our aunts, our uncles, our neighbors, our brothers, our sisters, everybody that forms that village to support our children, many of whom are standing behind us, thank you for your voices always being heard. I also share the mayor's passion and our council's passion about serving every one of our children, and equity and excellence cannot be a tag phrase. It must be lived every single day. And the only way that you can find evidence that it's being lived in our great city is by days like this, where across the country there are elected officials and elected bodies that this very day are cutting resources from students in public schools, are eliminating programs, are making conscious decisions of where to put their resources, and it's not in the public schools. But yet, in the largest, one of the most diverse cities in America, I would say the world-class city, the beacon of hope, the fairest city in America, New York City. Our elected officials are choosing consciously to invest in the very future of our great city, the children of New York City. And that's a great day for us. So we've talked about over 800 schools will feel the effect of this infusion of resources. But let me give you the number of students. 588,000 students in the city of New York will feel this impact. And Mr. Mayor, that's a majority of our students in our public schools in one fell swoop. And while this has been an ongoing focus of our elected officials and of this administration, I can tell you as a new guy, there could be no better investment than in the future of New York City itself, our children in our traditional public schools. We thank you for that investment. Now, you're about to hear from one of my colleagues who I have tremendous respect for our principals, and he'll tell you specifically how he plans to use this infusion of resources. Just rest assured, this is going to services and direct support of our students, more teachers, more socioeconomic, emotional support with guidance counselors and social workers, more art teachers, maybe perhaps more music teachers, maybe even a mariachi teacher or two. Hint, hint. But also new materials in our classrooms, after school and extracurricular enrichment activities and opportunities. You see, if you engage a child, then you are preparing that child for the future, and you're keeping that child from engaging in other activities that aren't so positive. So this is a benefit. This is also for the greater good of New York City. Now, we still won't be able to fund all of our schools at 100%. We're going to need additional support from the state of New York to make that happen. But I would say to you that while New York City is not waiting, we cannot do it alone. And I look forward to being in Albany next week, where I will meet with our state elected officials and make that case directly from the classroom to the Albany State Room about why it's so important for our students to have the funding they need, not for luxuries, but to be able to compete in a 21st century global economy. And if anyone can do it, New York can do it. So on behalf of all of the 1.1 million children, I want to say to Mr. Mayor, Mr. Speaker, members of the council, all of our community leaders that are gathered here, gracias, thank you. Y unas pocas palabras en español, si es posible. I want to commend our mayor who's gone through our dual language program, and you can see his Spanish is excellent. Quiero decir a todos los padres de familia en nuestras comunidades hispanoparlantes que nos estén escuchando que hoy es un día significante para nosotros. Es un día en donde nuestro liderazgo en nuestra ciudad ha hecho la declaración, la inversión de recursos para que nuestros estudiantes y nuestras comunidades aquí en nuestra ciudad querida de Nueva York tengan lo que necesiten para tener éxito académico y éxito en la preparación para que cuando salgan de las escuelas estén preparados ellos para tomar posiciones de liderazgo, de educación o tal vez sean oficiales elegidos también. Entonces queremos darle una sincera gracias a todos nuestros líderes que hacen posible de que nuestra educación en Nueva York no sea de segundo nivel, sino que siga siendo del primer nivel, preparando a nuestra comunidad para el futuro. Muchísimas gracias y un fuerte abrazo de parte de todos los niños. Gracias.
Mr. Chancellor, the word of this announcement spread very quickly, and schools have already been sending requests in. We have now approximately 854 schools requesting a mariachi teacher. So just wanted you to know that. As the Chancellor said, our principals obviously are the leaders who decide how best to move their schools forward. And we wanted you to understand directly from one of our great principals how this money will make a difference. Right here from Manhattan, the principal of the Leadership and Public Service High School, Philip Santos.
Hey, good morning. My name is Philip Santos, and as the mayor said, I am the principal of Leadership and Public Service High School in downtown Manhattan. It's a couple blocks away from here. Our work is based on the idea of equity, that every single child, wherever they live, any school building they walk into, that they deserve strong leadership, amazing teachers, and the necessary resources in order to reach their full potential. This is their right. Today's announcement is a game changer. It means more staff and programs that are going to meet our students' needs. It means doing better by our kids. It is social justice. Currently, we receive, Leadership and Public Service, 87% of fair student funding, the floor for schools across the city. Even at this level, there is so much important work funded by FSF. Because of our current allocation, we're able to fund a full-time social worker in order to meet the social and emotional needs of our students. We're able to fund a dean who's trained in restorative practices. And we are able to provide an after-school academic intervention program to do our best to meet the deficiencies that we have in our current population. But we are not able to fund everything that other schools can. And we're not able to pay for all the programs that will put our kids on a solid path for a successful college and career future. As a longtime principal, let me tell you this, every dollar counts. And with every dollar we receive, because of this investment, we will create a more equitable school. We're already making plans. The Leadership in Public Service needs a full-time college counselor, and these additional funds can pay for that. As we think about our kids getting ready for college, we need to offer the kind of SAT prep that many wealthier students and families take for granted. These funds can pay for that. We need to train our teachers regarding rigorous curriculum, culturally responsive pedagogy, bias and equity, and these funds can pay for that. We need more special education teachers in order to meet the individualized needs of all of our students, and these funds can pay for that. This is going to make a difference, and it will build on the investments already happening at our school, investments such as college access for all and AP for all. I want to thank Mayor de Blasio, Chancellor Carranza, and everyone that got this done. This investment, the opportunity to keep doing better for New York City students. Thank you.
Thank you.
So there's a real passion in the City Council on this issue, and it's felt far and wide. But one of the most passionate voices, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that he was a teacher himself for so long. He was the chair of the Education Committee for 4 years. He is now the chair of the Finance Committee, and boy, does he believe in fair student funding. Danny Drum.
Si el alcalde está hablando español, yo también quiero tratar de hablar un poquito español. Yo quiero agradecerse para estos fondos porque como nosotros sabemos, estos fondos van a dar una decisión a los principales, los directores de nuestras escuelas para usar estos fondos para cosas que necesiten en cada una de nuestras escuelas.
So easy for you.
Muchísimas gracias, alcalde de Blasio. I hope I got it all right.
You do it in English.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that nice introduction and for the availability of these funds. You are right. Since the beginning of your term, which was also the beginning of my term as the chair of the Education Committee, we have been working closely together to bring up the fair student funding funds that are available to our schools. And when you started, it was at 81%. It got up to about 87 or 89%, if I'm not mistaken. And now to bring it up to 93% is a huge increase. And it's going to go to things, as has been said before, that the principals in the schools will be able to determine how it will best be used. I want to thank our speaker as well for the fantastic work that he has done, and also our whole budget negotiating team and the other members of the City Council. We have at least 6 educators. I was trying to figure out how many educators are on the City Council now, but at least 6 educators, and I know that every one of those educators will tell you that this is the one issue that will really impact our schools directly. It's going to give them things that they desperately need. And let me also congratulate Mark Traeger for the fantastic job that he has done in bringing this issue to the attention of other council members as well. Fair student funding is not the sexiest issue in the world, but it certainly is one of the most important in the classroom. And I really thank you, Mr. Mayor, for working with us. Now, as we move down the budget path, we will say that we've only just begun. Thank you.
So it dawns on me as I prepare to introduce Mark Traeger, I don't know, someone should check the facts, I don't know if there's ever been a time in the history of the council, or certainly the recent history, where an educator was the chair of the Education Committee and then his successor was also an educator. Just like it's great to have an educator chancellor whose predecessor was an educator. I see a trend here. People who know something about education making decisions on education. We like this. So I want to say that Mark Traeger also knows from the front line what it's like to serve our kids. And yes, he has that special, feisty Brooklyn way about him.
I don't know what you're talking about.
We wouldn't want him any other way. The chair of the Education Committee, Mark Traeger.
As we say in southern Brooklyn, spasiba. Это очень хороший день. That's our... Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chancellor, Mr. Speaker. I said in Russian, it's a very good day. I want to thank, of course, the administration, the mayor, the chancellor, the speaker, the chair of the Finance Committee, my outstanding colleagues in the City Council. Let's give them a round of applause for their support. You know, I go back to my visit to Chair Drum's district, where we visited a school, renewal school, where we spoke with not just the principal, we spoke with students and educators there in the building. And when you ask the school what did they do with the extra resources allotted to them because they were a renewal school, the school hired an additional social worker, someone that spoke Spanish. The school is made up of 80% of English language learners. And the students shared with me a story that I'll never forget. They said, Mr. Traeger, we experience trauma outside in our community because of the national climate that is so hostile towards immigrants. These students said that they were afraid to even go buy ice cream outside because if they came across an authority figure, they might face deportation. And that trauma spills over into the school community. And that school leader wisely decided to use the added investment to hire a social worker where the students said that they feel safe, they feel welcome, they feel embraced. It becomes a mini sanctuary inside the school building. And then when you speak to the teacher says because they feel more safe and welcome, their attendance improved, their academic outcomes improved. It has had a cascading effect, positive effect in that school community. And so, respectfully to our leaders in Albany, when they say that the city is not transparent in how it spends money in our schools, they are misinformed. What is not transparent is why is Albany still shortchanging New York City schools after all these years? This will make a difference. And to be clear, excellence means 100% fair student funding. And I'm sure with my colleagues in the CSA and my colleagues in the City Council, the Speaker, the Finance, and I have to give the Speaker and our BNT and our Chair a lot of credit because they have given us the space and the capacity to advocate for this change. I also want to give LaTanya and our Finance team and Finance Division a big round of applause as well. They have empowered us to advocate for our community, so we're not going to stop our fight until every school is at 100% FSF, because this is their right, this is about their equity, and about their excellence. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So the last speaker on this topic is truly an expert. As president of CSA, longtime teacher and principal himself, but also represents all of our principals and administrators. And he's fought hard for this. And Mark, I want to thank you and all your colleagues in the CSA for fighting for this here and in Albany. And we're going to need you again in Albany to amplify this message. But the other thing I want to say as I bring him on is it's his birthday. Give him a big round of applause. Mark Cannizzaro.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for the birthday wishes, Mr. Mayor. At my age now, we need backs on those stools. It just dawned on me today as I reached this age. I would like to thank everyone who was involved today, and I heard Mr. Mayor speak of our educators leading the City Council, and it is so refreshing to be able to speak to people who understand the issue and ask the right questions and push back when necessary. I've had many, many conversations with Speaker Johnson, Council Member and Finance Chair Drum, also when he was the Education Chair, and Education Chair Traeger. And Mr. Traeger, when we had a budget hearing that had been postponed from a Tuesday due to snow to a Friday and was poorly attended, Mr. Traeger stayed the entire time, listened as if the room was packed, asked questions as if the room was packed, and took time to digest the information. So thank you so much, not only to you, but to all the members of the City Council who have fought so hard for us. This has been an issue that CSA has been advocating for a long time, and it was music to my ears, Councilmember Drum, for you to say, this is just the beginning. We have a lot of work to do. It is great of Mr. Mayor to, despite the state budget, put aside funds to increase fair student funding here in New York City. This funding, as the council member said, is not sexy. It doesn't make splashy headlines, but it affects children. And that's the #1 priority. Mr. Chancellor, thank you so much. I had one question for you. On a 1 to 4 on a Danielson rubric, how did the mayor do with his Spanish? Okay. There's a man who... That's right. But thank you so much for your commitment, all of you. It's really so much appreciated, and this is going to make a difference, and we're going to continue to fight here in this city, up in Albany, and everywhere we have to fight to make sure the children of this city get the education that they truly deserve. God bless you all, and thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take questions on this topic. After that, I know the council members have to go, or a number of them have to go to council-related meetings because it's a stated day today. But let's take questions on this topic, then I'll do other topics after. On this topic, Juan Manuel.
Mr. Mayor, Governor Cuomo said recently that the solution to educational inequity is not more money, but more data on how that money is spent. I want you to talk about that, and also, if this is so important to your agenda, in a budget of around $80 billion for the city, why, given the city council only half of what they asked?
Okay, on the second question, again, we've made huge progress since we came in here, consistently investing to address the fair student funding question, while simultaneously investing in a number of other initiatives to achieve equity. We need to do both. And we have been putting a huge amount into education with the support of the council. And by the way, they used to say in Albany, oh, the city's not putting a lot into education. More and more over the last years, the city puts more and more into education, the state puts less and less into education. So we really have to dispel with that mythology. The state is putting less in when they owe us even more, but we keep doing all we can to make up the difference. On the first question, this just has to be refuted. The governor has not presented any specific evidence for the claim that more money does not help us educate children better. Anyone who knows anything about education understands we need more teachers, more guidance counselors, more professional development. This notion, and it's basically a classic DLC or other kind of moderate Democrat formulation of, oh, it's just about efficiency. Government is inefficient. Remember, that's when Democrats were trying to cower in the face of Reaganism. I would say to you that our teachers, our educators, our administrators are doing better and better all the time because they're finally getting resources. They were starved of resources for years. They're finally getting resources. And what do we have now? We have the highest graduation rate we've ever had, and we've shown consistent progress on college readiness. A whole lot is happening. More and more kids taking the SATs, more and more kids taking advanced placement, because the resources are finally there. So anyone else wants to speak to this, I welcome. But of course you need more money to educate better. You have to use the money as best possible. But you do need more money to achieve a better education outcome. The second on the transparency, as you heard. The transparency has been there all along. We are about to abide by federal standards that require universal transparency around the country. We're very happy to do that. The facts are quite plain. So we need to stop the excuses. I don't understand any other place. I'd ask you to go look at states around the country where the highest court in the state orders something and then the state government ignores it. That's not good. It's not healthy. We need those resources to finish the job. Please, please.
Just on this, I think it's important, the budget, it looks like, is going to be somewhere between $89 billion and $90 billion in this adopted budget that we're going to adopt in June. And almost a third of the entire city budget goes to education. So there is a deep commitment from the city on education dollars. And I would also say that, you know, in this past state budget that was adopted less than a month ago, there were a significant number of unfunded mandates that were passed along to us as a city. We had to fund over $400 million for our part of the MTA Subway Action Plan, almost $200 million related to the implementation of Raise the Age, $31 million on close-to-home funding that we didn't get to see. And so even in the midst of over $500 million in unfunded mandates that were passed along to us, before we even started preliminary budget, executive budget hearings, the council and mayor were able to work together and prioritize a significant chunk of money, $125 million, which when you look at our budget response and you look at other things that were in the preliminary budget of new spending, this is a very significant commitment to deepening our resources to education in the city. We're already spending almost a third of the city budget on it.
Amen. Amen. Okay, on this topic, yes.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, what is the breakdown?
I feel like I saw you on a theatrical production recently. And who's the handsome guy next to you? Yeah. Go ahead.
The breakdown, how much is every school getting, and is every school getting an equal amount?
It's different depending on the school. And as we say, the classic technical briefing we'll get for you afterwards, details on how it breaks out. But I want to reflect on the examples that people gave, especially the principal, that this means very tangible things. In a typical school, it could mean, again, another reading specialist, it could mean another guidance counselor, it could mean any number of things that really change the lives of the kids in that school. And things that people have been waiting for a long, long time. I can tell you from my experience as a public school parent that just one or two more teachers, guidance counselors, trainers makes a world of difference. We used to, you know, in the PTA meetings and everything else, just do everything we could to advocate, just get us one more, because it changes the life of the school. So this is the beginning, and I agree with everyone, by the way. The goal is 100%. We're going to need help, but we're going to get to that eventually.
To get the state money that you say is due you?
It's the same thing. There's been total unity with the council on this, and obviously with the CSA and so many others. We've gone there year after year and kept this fire burning. And we believe one day we're going to achieve it. And by the way, last night's election results were important. Yes. Another step toward, this is not a partisan statement. I believe a Republican state Senate could have believed it was important to abide by a decision of the Court of Appeals too. But I think a Democratic Senate will feel, not just for New York City, for Buffalo, for Rochester, for Syracuse, for Albany, for upstate rural areas that haven't gotten their fair share. I think a Democratic Senate will decide to prioritize this. Please.
We both, the mayor and I, the mayor was the first person on the budget day in, I believe it was February. He testified at length about getting more money on education, foundation aid, and getting our fair share on the CFE lawsuit. I did the same thing. I was not the first of the day. I went after the mayors. I was there towards the end of the day, but I think the alignment on needing more education funds from Albany was there between the two of us, the council and the administration. And I really want to thank Speaker Hasty and his members who fought really hard to get us the funding that we got. I think there was an additional $370 million in new funds that came in on top of what we got last year in education funding from the state, but still did not keep pace with what we're owed from the CFE lawsuit.
Exactly. Okay, yes. I'll do this side and I'll come to that side.
I understand that you're raising the floor, but there could still be pretty big inequities between different schools with different budgets, especially since some schools receive more than 100% of the fair student funding formula. Some schools, so there could still be more than a 20% difference in what schools are owed. I'm wondering if this does anything to equalize, potential gaps in school budgets, even within the threshold that you've established.
Look, the vision I think we've all shared is we've got to keep bringing the floor and the average up. We have not said let's take schools that are doing a good job and take resources away from them. That's not our goal. Our goal is to it's an additive approach, to keep bringing the floor up and keep bringing the average up. So at a 90% floor and a 93% average, we're in striking range. We're literally just a few years away from achieving full equity, where every school is at 100%. That's the vision. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, Education Chief just said that he's seeing a lot of trauma in children in the schools. So how specifically these funds are going to be invested to fight against that? And I also would like to know if that is going to be extended, those programs, to fight the trauma in parents.
I'll start, and if the Chancellor or any of the Speaker or any other council members want to join in, of course. Two answers. One, Before this funding, the Thrive initiative is being applied in all our schools. Now, every school has access to mental health support. That was not true just a few years ago. And that is making a big difference. The second, each school under this approach gets to decide the priorities that are its focus. A lot of schools, I believe, will focus on guidance counselors and social emotional supports as one of their priorities, because we hear it more and more from educators and we hear it more and more from students. Some of you may have been at the town hall we had with students a few months back. Actually, one of the strongest messages they gave us was they wanted more focus on guidance and social emotional support. So I think you'll see this used for that in a number of schools.
So adding to what the mayor has talked about, so the notion in New York City where we've taken an approach that is not only an academic approach, but is also a social-emotional approach, and providing the wraparound services for students is a critically important one. We've talked about community schools, so I fully expect that many of our school communities that see an increase in funding are going to make their community schools approach a little more robust. And I've often said, when you see one community school, you've seen one community school. It's not a cookie-cutter approach. So it's based on the needs assessment for each individual school. So we know that schools already have a wish list. If I had a little more resources, this is what I could do to invest in creating that wraparound services network in schools. To your question about how will this then expand citywide, we're not interested in boutique programming in our school system. We are looking at everything that we do. How do we take that to scale? How do we have metrics to show that that's being effective? And as I recently met with Commissioner O'Neill from the NYPD, the New York City Police Department is also working closely with us to have safe routes to school so that we eliminate some of those trauma issues for students in terms of getting to school and getting home from school. So what we're really talking about here is a multi-dimensional approach to providing those safe systems for students to get to and get back home from school, but also as they've experienced trauma and the trauma that comes from living in a big urban city, we have ways to connecting them to the services. The mayor's already mentioned Thrive. We're going to ramp up what those connectivity, those connected tissues are around our Thrive initiative, but then we're going to continue to expand our community schools concept. And what I love about this ability to raise the floor is that our talented leaders in our schools, along with the teachers, get to make decisions that are locally based and locally effective.
Por ejemplo, para crear un tipo de programa para enseñarle a los niños cómo, por ejemplo, defenderse o cómo denunciar la presencia de ICE afuera, que precisamente el concejal decía que es el principal miedo que vemos.
Sí, la pregunta acerca de programas para especialmente nuestras comunidades inmigrantes. Es increíble la importancia de asegurar que nuestras comunidades, y varios de los que han hablado de que en las escuelas con trabajadores sociales, consejadores, han creado un ambiente en donde nuestros estudiantes se sienten a gusto, se sienten protegidos y se sienten que están seguros. Queremos aumentar ese tipo de proceso y ese tipo de aplicación de estos servicios. Pero como ha dicho el señor alcalde y como yo voy a repetir, en nuestras escuelas son refugios de seguridad para nuestros estudiantes inmigrantes, nuestras familias inmigrantes y para nuestros soñadores.
English version for those who do not outlaw.
Okay, so the question about how do we create safe environments for our immigrant students, our immigrant families in our schools, many of whom feel that sense of trauma just being targeted by what we've heard in terms of national immigration policy. I want to reiterate what has been said by many speakers, that many of our schools have already used whatever funding they have to create safe environments, additional counselors, additional social workers. They've created these environments where students and families feel safe. We are a community and a nation of immigrants. So I want to reiterate, and the mayor has been very clear about this as well, that our schools are safe zones for all families, including our immigrant families and including our dreamers. So I am fully confident that many of our leaders will invest these resources around programming that increases that safety zone.
Yes.
With the additional 125 million, what will the average amount spent per student be?
Again, we're going to give you the quote-unquote technical briefing showing you how it will play out with different schools and different amounts. But again, we know the dollar figure, we know what it'll do to the floor, we know what it'll do to the citywide average.
Just historically, why aren't all schools, I'm new to this, why are all schools not at 100%?
I'll give you my 30-second history of New York City education. Because it was 32 balkanized school districts with entirely different leaderships and budgeting approaches, and it was all about politics. I mean, look, I'm very clear there are areas where I energetically praise what Michael Bloomberg did, and this is one of them, getting us to mayoral control education and getting us out of a system that was incredibly uneven. There were some school districts and school boards that worked well. There were a lot, unfortunately, that did not. But you didn't have a single standard of equity. And so much of it came down to politics and influence, and the rich got richer. That's why it's so powerful. I want to thank the council. We have said now consistently, it's the 5th year we've said we're going to break down that history and create systematic equity. Yes?
Chancellor, on Friday, the city government put out data about sexual harassment.
Can we just stay on this? We'll come to that for sure. Can we just finish on this, and we'll certainly give you a credit for that question. Just ending on this announcement first.
Mr. Mayor, you used to be a school board member.
Correct.
Way back in the day.
Back in the day is right.
One of the issues about equity that goes on in the city is the more affluent schools often have like this whole fundraising apparatus that goes on. Yeah. So what you see is like some of them are amazing.
Yes.
It's like literally millions of dollars are raised. But then the school that's like, whatever, 300 yards away has none of that. Is this going to be factored into the distribution of this money?
It's a very good question, but I want to say it this way. Again, we are taking an additive approach. We want to not only make sure that every school soon, in a matter of only a few years, is at 100%, and we've proven it now over the last 4 years. But we want to support school communities in building as much capacity. I've often felt, and it's something that Chancellor and I have talked a lot about, we've not done a good job supporting our parents to build up their own capacity to hold the educators accountable in the right sense and to bring in whatever resources they can. Now, we know that's going to be different by community. But there is an ability to create more capacity school by school. It's a classic organizing point about helping each group of parents to have the most ability to do that. I do not believe we should in any way push back those who are bringing a lot of resources into their schools. I get the, Lord knows I focus on the question of equity, but if some school communities are bringing a lot of resources, to me that's additive too, and all to the good. I want every dollar I can get going into public education because the needs are vast. And even schools in communities that are more affluent tend to support kids of all economic backgrounds. And I can certainly say that from District 15. So it's a very different matter of what street the school is on versus where does the entire student body come from. And District 15 is a classic example. My neighborhood is a neighborhood where people's incomes are pretty strong. Not far away and in the same district is Red Hook. Not far away and in the same district is Sunset Park, where incomes are a lot lower, and whereas in Red Hook's case, a lot of public housing. So I think in a lot of ways, when that money comes in from even private sources, it helps a broad swath of kids. See other on this side? No, yeah, please, please.
So Councilmember Chair Traeger has, Greg, a bill on this, which would require that schools report to the DOE how much fundraising has been done every year to understand school by school how much is being raised. So that's one thing you could probably talk to him about separately. The second thing is, I think a classic example of what you talked about. In Chelsea, in my district, you have PS 11 on 21st Street between 8th and 9th Avenue. 5 blocks north at 26th Street and 9th Avenue is PS 33. At PS 11, the PTA raises, I believe, $800,000 a year. At PS 33, 5 blocks north, the PTA, I think, raises less than $100,000, maybe $50,000 within 5 blocks of each other. It's important for us to understand this so we know how to direct resources.
Okay, last call on this side, and we're going to that side. You. No, we're doing media only today. Next time for you, Bo. Go ahead, Henry.
They determine the 100% number, and how did you determine that you would only spend, this amount and not double it, or even just come up to 100% right now?
On the first one, I'm going to let the technical folks give you that because I'm not an expert on how that is determined. On the second point, look, you're going to hear tomorrow the whole shape of things. But I want to point to what the speaker just said. One of the headlines tomorrow is, yes, we sustained an over $500 million hit from Albany. It's one of the biggest hits we've taken in recent years. That certainly affected our capacity to do things. And I'll be clear, we all, I think this group here knows something about politics. I don't know a single person who did not expect education aid to shoot up in an election year in Albany. I think everyone was surprised it didn't go farther. So before you even talk about the CFE case, which really should be driving this, we thought maybe other factors, wink, wink, would be driving this, and we were surprised at the outcome. But so that's one thing affecting our decision. And then, as we'll talk about tomorrow, a whole host of competing needs. We also, structurally, do not believe this is just the city's responsibility. The state historically is supposed to be the core of education support. And we can't just say, oh, well, no worries, state of New York, you don't have to do that anymore, which some people in Albany would love to hear. We're not going to allow that to happen. It's not fair to our students. Last on this side, going to this side.
Mayor, you said at the start of this press conference that even when the state doesn't act, we, meaning the city, don't stand still. I'm wondering how you square that position, or how you decided to put money in for the state here, but how that squares with your opposition to doing that on issues like the MTA or on fair fares where you don't want to put money in for the state.
Well, because they're apples and oranges would be a good beginning. I mean, come on. The history of MTA funding versus the history of education funding, totally different animals. The city has historically put, and I want to give another credit to Michael Bloomberg. They put a lot of money into education. We put a lot more money into education. That's been going on for quite a while. The MTA, I don't know if you heard about this, it's run by the state of New York, and they have responsibility. Of course, strap hangers, taxpayers have been paying a huge amount from the city into the MTA already. So they're very structurally different. But there is a common link. The state has been trying to find ways to get at New York City's money for years. Remember the CUNY? Remember they tried to get CUNY money? Remember they tried to get Medicaid money? It is dangerous to the future of New York City. This is something the Speaker and I have talked about a lot. And I want to thank him because he really is he's a progressive who's fiscally responsible. And we have to be the guardians of the future of the city because, bluntly, some of our predecessors decades ago were not. So we have to protect the city's long-term interest. If we let every one of these state forays come through, we'd have nothing left. They've literally tried it in subject after subject after subject. It's quite clear. So no, we have to be very careful not to change the paradigm unfairly against the city's needs and interests on the MTA. But in education, we've actually proven we were willing to do more and more within our means, but we're not letting them off the hook for their legal obligation. Yes. Yes. And like everything before, when I talked about that growth, everything that we did was baselined.
And so now what's the total, how much money is in this bucket of fair student funding that goes to the schools every year?
Everything that has been put in since the beginning. Let me get you the total number. I'm going to rephrase and make sure I'm getting it right. Everything we contributed to bringing fair student formula up, that is now baselined. You want that total number. We'll get that for you after.
Two questions. One, the parallel with the MTA funding is you believe the state misappropriated, I think it was $468 million. The state was asking...
$456.
$56 million. The state was asking you to put in more money, and you adamantly refused.
Yes.
In this case, you feel the state owes the city money in the case of the CFE,
yep.
But in this case you're saying we're going to plug in part of the gap. So there is kind of a discrepancy in how you're
approaching each issue.
What I was trying to say in the previous answer is they're totally different areas of endeavor with totally different imperatives. So it's not strange if you have different approaches if they're very different things. So if you want to argue to me that the history of the city's funding, especially in recent decades to the MTA, parallels what we've done in education, I'll have that argument all day long. They're totally different. In this case, we felt that even though the state did not come through, it was important to keep the progress going. And it was important to also show the state that we would always carry part of what we thought was fair to do, as we have with so many other elements of education. But to also make clear that we are close to this goal and we can only get there with them, and they should join us in getting to this goal. That's the theory of the case.
The other issue is about 2 weeks ago when the council said it wanted to prioritize fair fares, they were looking for about $200 million a year, and you said there wasn't enough money for that. So how did you find this money, and isn't it just a question of priority then and not enough money?
We will tomorrow go into the latest on what has changed since the preliminary budget, both new expenses and new revenue, and what the impact to Albany was with the state budget. And then it will be clear where this fits in the equation. We still have to be very careful fiscally, but we decided, in light of the council's focus, that this was the right thing to do. But you'll get a fuller explanation tomorrow when we unveil the whole budget. Yes?
Mr. Mayor, just looking for some more clarity on the funding formula. So schools that are currently at 100% and don't qualify for this extra funding,
correct.
How did they get to 100%? Is it all independent fundraising?
No, not at all, not at all. And again, we'll let the budget folks go over some of that detail with you, but the simple historical fact is we're all dealing with a coherent school system right now, right? There's mayoral control, mayor chooses a chancellor, chancellor runs a unified school system. That is really new. That's only the last 15 years. For decades and decades before, it was totally balkanized, highly political, unfortunately in often cases quite corrupt, and the money was not distributed evenly. That was not erased when mayoral control came in. We are still making up for those mistakes of the past, and we've been systematically addressing them.
Can you give an example when you say highly politicized? Where is their extra money coming from?
Again, someone can give you a perfect example from the history, but you got to go back to, there was the Board of Estimate, there were the 32 school districts, there was a chancellor chosen by a school board. I mean, there's all sorts of things that don't resemble today. And there was a lot of horse trading and resources. I'm sure you're not shocked by this. In politics, there was horse trading and resources flowed and they didn't flow fairly. This is an entirely different paradigm where now everything's being put on a universal basis steadily, and you can actually get to a day where you're at 100% in every school. That doesn't mean some schools won't have more because of either that history or because they do some extra fundraising. We don't want to take from them. We don't think that's good practice. But we can bring everyone up to 100%. Okay, so is there anything else? Yes, please, Mark.
I'm a former history teacher, so I'm going to give a little bit of the history of FSF here briefly. So Fair Student Funding was born out of the CFE movement because, as the mayor noted, historically, this was just never really accounted for. Equity, fairness, the needs of kids, that was all out the window. It was just politics back in the day. So FSF was a formula created to try to assess the needs of our kids. So when we hear from Albany that poverty is not accounted for in the city of New York, when it comes to schools, actually it is, up to the 3rd grade. Beyond that, if a student is English language learner, there's a certain added weight to that formula. If the student has an IEP, there's an added weight to the formula. If the school is a CTE school, there's an added weight to that formula. And there was a point, as the CSA has a good history on this as well, that schools were at 100% back in the prior administrations, but because the state and others have kind of fallen behind their obligation to schools, those numbers have been dwindling. And there's been inequities in where schools are 100%, where schools are below 90%. So again, the mayor is addressing, together with us, addressing historical inequities and trying to get our schools all to 100% FSF, back to 100% FSF. But to be clear, this was born out of the movement to create fairness and equity in our school system. This was born out of the CFE movement, and the state of New York is still not complying with court orders and just basic decency here. So that's the history of FSF.
All right, last call, because these people have been standing here a long time. Good activists. We're gonna give you your hall pass so you can go. But let me see, there's one more on this, and then these guys can cut out. On this topic, we're coming back to you when we transition off of this topic. Go ahead.
Transition question.
Let me see if there's an actual, just anything else on this specific announcement related enough. Okay, go ahead.
Equity and budget. So some advocates for middle school summer camp were upset that that's $20 million for that was not in your preliminary budget. And they said you want to sustain the gains from the equity and excellence programs, they need to have summer camp to avoid learning loss. Is summer camp for middle schoolers in your executive budget tomorrow, and why not?
No.
Why not?
Because as meritorious as it is not as strategic an approach as we want. The council, there's a lot of support for it in the council. It will be part of the discussion with the council. Everyone who's been around here any period of time knows that in the final stages of negotiation, some of the most important priorities of the council, of course, emerge. I don't know if that'll be one or not, but it's not in my executive budget very clearly because we think the other investments, the equity and excellence investments, the FSF investments are more strategic. It's as simple as that. Okay, on this, go ahead.
Question. Advocates have also raised the sort of $10 million for homeless students that was left out,
Right.
and I'm wondering if that will be...
We will speak to that tomorrow. Let me not get ahead of tomorrow's announcement. We obviously want to make sure those students are served, but they'll give you the specifics tomorrow. All right, I'm going to transition, so anyone who needs to go, this is your chance to escape. If you want to stay, you're very welcome, but thank you, everyone. Okay, everybody get ready. Okay, ready, here we go. Willie.
It's probably a process question for the chancellor. The city put out data on sex harassment cases in city government. The one that stood out most was the Department of Education, which had nearly 500 complaints, and yet only 7 of them were substantiated. The city responded by more than doubling the EO officers at the Department of Education. Talk to me about when was that information presented to you? Who did you speak with here involved in the what is the plan to add the EO officers? What is your plan to handle this problem?
Respectfully, we're just not going to do the tick-tock of every meeting and who talked to who. We can speak to what we're doing, but we don't do all the internal. I'm giving you that you try this every time. We don't do this. We just don't believe it's pertinent.
I think it's important to be very clear that we take any allegations of sexual harassment or any kind of harassment very, very serious in the Department of Education. And we've increased the number of investigators. We're working very closely with the city of New York. And under our administration, we will continue to take that seriously. And we will investigate fully any incidences that we are made aware of.
Well, let me just ask specifically, why were so few cases substantiated at the Department of Education?
With all due respect, that's a BR question, which means before Richard. I wasn't here. I've only been here a short time, so I can't speak to why it was and why it wasn't. I can tell you that since I've arrived, We will take every allegation of sexual harassment, every allegation of harassment, every allegation that comes forward extremely seriously. As I work with my team, we will continue to work closely with the City of New York, and we will take it very, very seriously.
But I want to speak to the larger phenomenon, which is what's abundantly clear is there was not a single standard for quote-unquote mayoral and quote-unquote non-mayoral agencies. So remember the history here. We've got Department of Education still under a state law rubric as a non-mayoral agency. Obviously, NYCHA is a freestanding agency. Health and Hospitals is also not a mayoral agency. Those had very different realities than the mayoral agencies. We are going to align all the standards to the single mayoral agency standard. NYCHA, for example, had a standard based on federal guidelines. The federal guidelines on sexual harassment are not as rigorous as the city guidelines. So one thing that has come out of this very important movement, this emerged from a social movement in this country that demanded clearer answers from every segment of society, is we're aligning all standards on sexual harassment across all agencies. And I think that's going to make a big difference. Yeah.
This is not a TikTok question. This is a transparency question. So the Department of Homeless Services is required by law to report on what is called critical incidents. And they made a decision not to report on arrests that take place within shelters. And as we reported today, there are hundreds of arrests at shelters all over the city that they do not report to the public. Can you just tell us what is the public to make of this? And isn't there a better way?
We believe your interpretation is incorrect. Let me make that as plain as I can. The NYPD believes your source is inaccurate, and we do provide arrest data. There's different classifications for different things, but we provide the arrest data. The fact is that for decades, the NYPD did not supervise shelter security. In the last few years, we created a paradigm, and I'm talking about since modern homelessness began in the early 80s. It was only in the last few years that we brought the NYPD fully into the training and supervision of shelter security. We are very comfortable being transparent about arrests in shelter. So I dispute the assumptions that you're bringing to your story.
The arrests, as I understand it, to the state, but you don't report it to the public.
Again, I'm going to ask you to ask the NYPD for their full explanation of why they contest your source. I think they're the experts on safety and security. Print
was that they do not separate out this information because it would create a stigma for the shelter residents. Therefore, it is incorporated.
Again, I'm not going to take your interpretation. I'm directing you to the NYPD for their interpretation. I'm comfortable that the NYPD is committed to transparency. I'm comfortable that we have stronger shelter security than we've ever had. We are very comfortable giving people a picture of what's going on in the shelters, and it's also causing, because there is better shelter security, it's helping us get people off the streets who used to not come off the streets for the fear of the shelters.
I have two questions on the sexual harassment stats. Since the DOE, what transpired at the DOE was before the current chancellor, do you have any concerns about how Pennsylvania handled it? Every single sexual harassment case that's investigated, the outcome is reported to the head of the agency. Are you surprised you didn't catch on that none of these are getting substantiated?
I think there's a different reality for every one of the non-mayoral agencies. So I mentioned 3. They all have a different reality. And hey, let me just ask folks from our team maybe to help get people quieter over there so that everyone can hear. That worked. So, as I mentioned, NYCHA was working off a federal standard that was an entirely different standard and a broader, less rigorous standard. Health and Hospitals has its own different reality, different numbers than the other 2. Department of Education, one, needs to be united with the mayoral agency standards. 2, we are retraining everyone in city employment in how to properly address these issues. But three, there is a distinct reality at Department of Education, and I'll say it gently. There has been a history, it's pretty well known inside the education world, of some people bringing complaints of one type or another for reasons that may not have to do with the specific issue. And this is not just about sexual harassment, it's about a whole host of potential infractions. Any sincere reporting, whether it regards sexual harassment or cheating on tests or anything, we take very, very seriously, we act on. And we have to investigate everything. But it is a known fact, and unfortunately, there's been a bit of a hyper complaint dynamic, sometimes for the wrong reasons. So I think that has inflated their numbers. We need to address that cultural reality within the DOE. It's a thorny issue, something the chancellor's going to have to look at, but I think that is part of the reality.
Within the mayor's office, there were 5 or fewer substantiated complaints during your administration.
Right.
I guess in order to know whether agencies are dealing with these substantiated cases fairly, it helps the public to know whether the individuals who were found guilty were punished in any way. Yeah. Your office is declining to provide that for your office, even though there's more than 500 people within the mayor's office. Why?
Because we've explained this, but I'll explain again. So first of all, in the instances, it's 5 or fewer. In the entire mayor's office, as you said, 500 plus people, and this is over the 4 years. In each case, it was substantiated. In each case, there was discipline. So I just want to make that broad statement. This is going to be an ongoing discussion because we are going to move to a system, as I said, of training and retraining every city employee. We're going to go to a system of annual reporting, and we want to show cumulative numbers that give people a sense of what's going on. When you get down to a very granular level, there is an honest and meaningful problem of exposing the victim's identity. If the information is so specific that any one of you would then pursue it and then portray the specifics of the case, there's a very good likelihood the victim's identity would come out. You all know for a fact, once it's starting into the public domain, there's no guarantee otherwise. A lot of the victims, a lot of the complainants do not want their identity out. And we have to honor that too. So we're balancing confidentiality concerns with transparency concerns. We think we're hitting a balance point here. Please.
To follow up on Yoav's first question about the DOE and the unsubstantiated cases, you said there's been a hyper-complaint aspect, that you're putting it gently. Are you saying that people are lying when they're reporting sexual harassment?
No, I'm not specifically talking about sexual harassment. I'm talking about, as I said, and I want you to please, excuse me, I was really clear. I said a wide range of infractions at DOE that people might put in complaints on. Some are absolutely sincere. Many, I'm sure, are absolutely sincere. We take them very seriously. We have to investigate everything. We treat everything with equality when it comes to investigation. But I'm also trying to be honest about something that is different at DOE than a lot of other places. And it's a pretty well-known thing in the educational world. Some people inappropriately make complaints for other reasons. I'm not even sure it's ever about sexual harassment, but it is unfortunately a part of the culture and it has to be addressed separately.
Are you including sexual harassment? And then I'm just curious, if you're not, why you would use that?
Because the point, again, if some people, it's a well-known thing that some people engage in that practice, I can't parse out for you who was sincere and who was insincere and what type of offense. I can't get there. I can tell you the fact it's unfortunately a part of the culture of an agency that is changing that we need to address. Imagine if you were a teacher and whatever the complaint was, someone filed a complaint against you for ulterior motives. Unfortunately, that's a known fact that happens more in that agency than some other places. It's another one of the complexities we have to deal with. But we look at every complaint assuming sincerity and substance and follow through on every one. It's just something you need to understand as part of the numerical reality.
Two questions. One, what was the process for selecting members of the Charter Commission? Was there any consideration given to whether they were donors or not? And my second question is, have you had any discussions with the City Council Speaker about possibly merging the commission with theirs?
They're different concepts. So no, we've talked very openly about the goals of each commission. Very productive conversations. They are trying to achieve different things. We have some immediate things that we think need to be on the ballot for November, while simultaneously looking at bigger issues, as Chairman Perales has pointed out. The Speaker wants to do a multi-year approach that focuses on big structural issues and would take more time to address. So I think there are two good efforts proceeding in parallel. We'll keep talking as they both progress. Of course, whether someone was a supporter or a donor was not a factor. We looked for people who we thought could bring a lot to the process. Diverse perspectives by geography and demographic background, diverse perspectives by profession and area of focus in terms of life of the city, folks who had achieved a lot and brought something to a discussion of the civic needs of the city. Some people were particularly focused on the democracy issues that are central to the mandate. Cesar Perales is a great example. Huge swath of his life's work has been about ensuring that the democratic process was actually representative and inclusive, going back to his days at the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, right up to his last job as Secretary of State, which is all about voting rights and voting participation, among other things. So that's what we looked at in creating this commission, and I think we put together a very strong group, and I'm looking forward to to what they bring forward.
In the process, do you ever consider maybe that you ever consider excluding people that have given money to your campaigns?
I just don't even get that theory. It's like the campaigns happen, they're all over. Some people gave money, some people didn't. It's just, I don't even understand where that line of reasoning goes. I want people who I think are good, publicly minded people who bring perspective to the process, who are willing to put in a lot of hard work, who clearly share the aspiration of improving the democratic process in the city. If they were involved in political campaigns for me or anyone else is not relevant. The last one, and then I'm going to move on.
As a general principle, you don't think that appointing donors to city commissions raises confidence?
No, because first of all, if you look at these folks, I mean, it's interesting that some of the media coverage looked back as far as 2001 to see if they had ever donated to anything I've ever done. I mean, it's getting a little silly. No, if they're people who have an independent profile of important public work, I don't care if they gave to me or they gave to someone else or they gave to multiple people. I don't care. It's not pertinent to the decision.
Neighborhood parking permits, and does this idea, I think, moves forward at the council? Does it have any open opening?
I think it's a really complex idea, meaning I think there's some real merit and I think there's some big challenges at the same time. So I grew up with it, since born here, but a lot of my upbringing was in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that had them. And I could give you the case for them, but I also have to caution, this is the most complex environment for traffic anywhere, certainly in this country. And there are a lot of downsides too. So is it worth studying? Absolutely. I don't know if it would actually be supported in Albany. I think you're right that some of it at least would require state authorization. But we'll look at the proposed legislation. We'll give it serious consideration. I just want to caution people, this is a classic, sounds good, and there are some good things, but there's also a lot of unintended consequences. No, it's not. It's literally, I can see pros and cons. I'm not comfortable yet, but I think it's a really important thing to discuss.
Two questions on the sex harassment. Follow up what Kelly was saying. It sounds as if you're saying the culture of hyper-complaining at the DOE led administrators to look more suspiciously at sexual harassment complaints and therefore unsubstantiated more at that agency than at other agencies.
No, I understand why you get to that conclusion, but that's not what I'm saying. I appreciate the question. I'm saying that you have, again, this is based on a broad analysis of what we've experienced for years and years at the Department of Education. You unfortunately have a different culture than we see in most other agencies. So I for a moment think you guys should be responsible for trying to understand life inside the government. It's just, you have to live it to fully understand it. Every agency is different. Every agency has its own culture. And this is an unfortunate thing that has to be addressed. It's very broad. But it means that on many fronts, we get a certain number of complaints that are not real. I can't give you the breakout. I'm not trying to give you the breakout. I'm saying, based on what we know, we believe it's probably a contributing factor. But it's also the past. The Me Too movement and all the other related movements have, to their great credit, required of all of us that we come up with a single strong common standard, which we'll now have for the entire government. Again, pushing 400,000 people will all be under one standard, an entire government-wide retraining, annual reporting, and very rigorous follow-up. And I think this is going to make us better. But it would be unfair to the public to not acknowledge that there's something different at DOE, and that's another problem also we have to address more.
At the NYPD, many of the largest settlements with the city over sex harassment claims in the last 4 years are at the NYPD. It appears that there's a culture there of retaliation in the face of some of these complaints. Are you comfortable with the way that the complaints of sexual harassment have been handled at the NYPD?
I think every agency has to examine itself and figure out the ways it can be better. And absolutely, NYPD does as well. I'm not familiar with all the chapter and verse. Of course, retaliation is absolutely unacceptable anywhere. And by the way, not just in terms of a sexual harassment claim, any kind of claim that then leads to retaliation is unacceptable, and we would punish if substantiated. So I think agencies have to do better across the board. I'm certainly going to talk to Commissioner O'Neill about how we can continue to improve the practice at the NYPD. But I believe that, again, this movement has helped us all to set the bar higher, and that's going to be universal. No agency will be excluded.
Mr. Mayor, can you address the letter that you and the speaker sent to the MTA demanding accountability?
I happen to have a copy. So, look, this is one of the most common sense things you're going to hear in a long time. I said this the other night on New York One. We were asked by the state to contribute to the Subway Action Plan over $400 million. We make the contribution, and then just days later, it comes out that the East Side Access Project, already long overdue, already greatly over budget, is an additional $1 billion over budget. Same funding base as everything else the MTA does. So I found that disingenuous, to say the least. That had that information been provided to the public and to the legislature, if they heard that the MTA had blown another $1 billion, I'm not sure they would have been so quick to demand that the city put in the money that we put in. So we're not going to keep contributing the taxpayers' money into a sinkhole. We're not going to be, the fall guys for the MTA's inefficiency and ineffectiveness. So what we're saying with this letter, and I want to thank Speaker Johnson, this is a joint effort, is we want a full accounting for everything in the Subway Action Plan that we're contributing to. We want to see exactly how the money is being spent. We want to see there's really a lockbox. That's now state law. It says there has to be a lockbox. We don't believe there's a lockbox until it's proven to us there is a lockbox, because the MTA has baited and switched us all so many times before. So we want to see how the money is spent. We want to ensure it is spent on our subways. We want to see what's working, what's not. And we want this accounting to be public and transparent and regular and consistent. Because it's outrageous that the MTA would take our money but not agree to transparency. So this letter went to Chairman Loda, and we expect to hear a clear response and a quick response guaranteeing that the people of this city will have that transparency. And our board members are making very clear that we're not going to continue to accept a lack of transparency at the MTA or ineffective spending of money. We all know that compared to other cities with big transit systems, the MTA is not using its money as well. We all know there's been huge waste of money. We're not going to continue to accept that.
Going back to the sexual harassment numbers, can you just elaborate what about the DOE culture you believe?
I think I said it a bunch of times. I don't know what's missing.
Culture, but what about it in the DOE culture leads to hyper?
I'm just saying it's a reality. I can't give you the sociological reasons. I'm saying it is a reality we have to address. And again, I'm going to say it 12 times. It far transcends any one type of infraction or complaint. It is a generalized culture we have to address, where people use the complaint process for reasons other than a legitimate complaint.
what happened?
We're going to aggregate the numbers, and as I said, that will become an annual practice. I understand the questions of wanting to get closer and closer to the details of each specific case. We believe the appropriate thing to do is to give you the numbers to show you what's happening. Obviously, we've been transparent about money that was paid out, and I would say we look forward to the day when that's zero, but in the context of an organization with almost 400,000 people over 4 years, thank God it's a pretty low number. But we are not going to expose the individual complainant or victim, and if there's too much detail about specific cases, that inevitably will happen. That's the line we're drawing.
We had on a separate topic, we had a story this week that showed that 3/4 of the housing that's been built under your affordable housing plan is in it's being built in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. And I just wanted you to speak to whether you think that's helping segregation in housing here in the city.
I think we are building housing. Let's separate the building and the preserving. 60% of the affordable housing plan is preserving, and that's happening very broadly. Look at Stuytown and Peter Cooper as an example, and all sorts of other locations around the city where we're preserving housing. On the new building, central consideration is where is there land to do it? And that has tended to be farther out in the outer boroughs and in many cases in communities of color. But the lottery system guarantees that 50% of the people who get those apartments can come from anywhere in the city. So I believe that does forward the work of a more integrated city. Yes?
The Department of Education is floating a desegregation plan on the Upper West Side for the middle schools. And I went to a meeting yesterday where a lot of parents, the vast majority of whom were white, were very vocally opposed to this plan, saying it could hurt their children's chances of getting into the top middle schools on the Upper West Side. What would you say to those parents, and is DOE committed to this plan despite the opposition?
So let me do two parts. The first is I always will say to you when I know the details of something. When I don't, I have not seen the details of the plan, I will only refer to the previous effort in CEC 3, which I think was one of the better things that's been done in the last few years in this city to address diversification of our schools. And there was a lot of opposition to that in the beginning. I think we ended up in a very good place where we had a clear way of improving the quality of many schools while creating diversity. I can't speak to the new plan because I haven't seen it. But the notion that there's initial hesitation or opposition is pretty standard. I think the more we have a community conversation, I think a lot of people actually buy into the notion they want diverse schools. They also want really good schools, and those two goals can happen in concert. The mistake in the past, in my opinion, going back decades of American educational history, is opposing those two concepts. Opposing desegregation and school quality rather than saying we have to achieve both simultaneously. And I think what CEC 3 did was a very positive model of how you show the two can go hand in hand. Last call.
Mr. Mayor, in regard to the payments to the MTA, are there further payments due that you're going to hold up, or are we just talking about some sort of an accounting of what's gone in already?
We're being very clear that we have allocated this money. It will be in the budget that we present tomorrow. But we're going to hold the MTA accountable, work with board members, work with advocates, work with the general public to break this cycle. The MTA has continued to waste money. I mean, you talk about in broad daylight. The state loves to criticize the city. Well, look in the mirror. Right now, the state is hemorrhaging money at the MTA. And I don't hear a lot of apologies. Another $1 billion blown on East Side Access. And who knows how much more it will take. So we're not going to let that happen to our money. We need a full accounting. And I think it is the beginning of a bigger movement, and you'll certainly hear from our board members on this, to stop this blank check approach at the MTA, that we want everything accounted for. And MTA's had a habit of blending different things together. A lot of us were outraged at the notion of, a couple of $100 million for lights on bridges when the trains weren't running on time. They sort of throw it into one omnibus. We got to stop that. We got to be able to say we don't need the lights on the bridges. We'd love to improve stations, but only after all the money has gone to getting the trains to run on time. Everything has to be about accountability. And that's never been the case at the MTA, and I hope we're sparking that now. Thanks, everyone.